Hey everyone, I'm Noah Barnett, the founder of Purple Shadow Gaming, and we are back for another Set 7 meta review. And this time, I've brought back Justin, John, and Andy, like always. So thanks for being here, everybody.
Glad to be here.
Fun times.
Yeah. So originally we said in the last episode that we were going to use this episode to really talk about a variety of decks, but something happened this weekend and we have to discuss it. Ruby's back, and specifically Ruby Sapphire. So if you haven't been following at Charlie's collectible card show, which was a 8K that turned into a 13K, I think there was over 300 players. Ruby Sapphire was 3 of the top 4. After 9 rounds of Swiss and top 8, Ruby Sapphire was back on the map. And I think what was most interesting is that Ruby Amethyst was the 4th deck. There was no Sapphire Steel. There was no Emerald Steel. There was no Amethyst Steel. There was no Steel.
There's no steel.
In top 4. So we thought we should get the gang back together and really dig into Ruby, but specifically Ruby Sapphire. Like, what has made Ruby Sapphire be able to resurrect of sorts and come back and storm a field of 300 plus players and take the top 4 in the way it just did? It ended up being number 1 and number 2 in that tournament. I think it won a few other tournaments over the weekend. So like, what was it about this weekend that made Ruby Sapphire so powerful? We wanted to get the gang back together and do a Ruby Sapphire review. But before we do that, let's check in with you all. How's everyone doing? What's your reflections on the weekend? Andy?
I love seeing
Andy, you won a tournament this weekend.
I did win the tournament this weekend. It was a very small
I
tournament.
was first going into top 8, but then I lost.
Happens. Purple Steel's pretty good.
I was playing Sapphire Steel and Amethyst Steel took me down. And then Amethyst Steel beat my son in top 4. And then you took down Amethyst Steel in the finals.
Yep. Yeah, purple matchups are my strengths right there. But specifically, you lost to a card, right? I think John's talked.
Bring it up.
John's talked about. John has talked about this card several times.
I don't even think Justin knows what we're talking about.
No.
I lost to a specific card this weekend, and it was very annoying.
Which card was it?
And I was very frustrated. John was like, "Do you want to play test more?" And I was like, "No."
I don't even know the name of the card. It calls me.
It calls me.
Yep. Moving those items back into the deck.
Yeah. Are you familiar with this card, Justin?
Not exactly, no.
John, give the man the facts.
I love this card. It's a true cantrip. It costs 1. It's a song. It's in purple. So you draw a card when you play it, and you can shuffle up to 3 cards from your opponent's discard back into their deck. And it's up to, so you can choose 0, 2, 3, which is beautiful.
Yeah. Inkable. And so my Amethyst Steel opponent in top 8 was playing 4 of those instead of Diablos.
That's still crazy to me how the items going back messes with that deck so much.
Yeah. So the turn before I played Tamatoa, he was like, I think it calls me. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. I played Bell, was trying to recover. I had 1 card left in my hand. I drew a card. It was an uninkable. I only play 8. So I wasn't able to play Tamatoa. So I have to pass. He draws and he's like, it calls me. Put your 2 items back into your deck. I draw an inkable. I have no items in my discard pile.
I seem to remember pointing that card out when we were talking about new cards from the set, and we were talking about the new Legendary Queen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It calls me. It's just strictly going to be better in competitive play.
Yeah, it's wild.
Definitely.
If it makes you feel any better, I got beat to 99 puppies on Lorcana.
No way.
Yeah,
that's even worse.
They were on.
Tell 14. Us more, Justin.
They were on 14, right? And they had Lilo and like a 1 quester down. I'm like, there's no way you can get there. And is that right? No, that must have been on 15. I'm like, there's still no way you can get there. And then top deck. He had nothing in hand. Top deck, 99 puppies to 20. Like, you gotta be kidding me. Because I had it next turn. I'm not gonna challenge your guys. I'm fine.
What does puppies do again?
Characters for 1 more.
Say that one more time, sorry.
It's a 5-cost uninkable action, not a song. All your characters quest for 1 more. It's
wow.
It's an amber, but at 5 uninkable action, it's hard.
So Andy won a tournament. I lost to It Calls Me. Justin lost to 99 Puppies. John, I think you won a Friday night tournament with a very interesting card.
Oh yeah, the Return of Hercules.
Return of Hercules.
I went undefeated with a show and tell deck. So
Nice.
that felt good. It's not truly a competitive list, but undefeated's undefeated.
Yeah. Nice.
It's a good time. Well, glad you all are back, even after some good weekends, some bad weekends for Justin and I specifically. I'm just glad I have a co-conspirator that had a bad weekend as well. 99 Puppies is probably worse than It Calls Me.
I don't like you.
Yes.
Well, I'm really grateful. I like coming in third. It's really helpful. We are not here for this banter. We are here to dive into another set review. So let me go ahead and share my screen so we can go ahead and dig into our set 7 meta review, where we're going to be diving into Ruby Sapphire. So Ruby Sapphire is an interesting color combination because at the end of set 6, Ruby Sapphire was undeniably the best deck in the format. Specifically the Shark deck, but I think Ruby Sapphire in general was very dominant. Just like a magnificent deck. Set 7 comes around and Sapphire Steel really takes that limelight. And then this weekend specifically, on the back of Sapphire Steel being hyped, Ruby Sapphire had an incredible conversion rate from the field into top 8s, and then ultimately took down some of the biggest tournaments of the weekend. And before we dive into the specific deck list, we do want to, like we always do, really talk about the new cards that set 7 brought Ruby Sapphire. And specifically, I'm curious, Justin, John, and Andy, why these cards weren't as exciting originally, and maybe what has changed over the course of the set 7 development. The first card we have, or really the first 3 cards we've talked already about. First is Belle, Apprentice Inventor. Second is Tamatoa, Happy as a Clam, or I think it's called Baby Tamatoa nowadays.
Yep.
We also have Scrooge McDuck, Resourceful Miser. Fun fact, my first AOL name was AA Miser. Do you remember what your first AOL name was back in the day, like AOL Messenger?
I did have
An
AOL.
AOL name. How old are you?
Did you guys not do that? Was that just a me thing?
I did AOL for a little while.
I did AOL. I don't remember the name.
You guys don't remember that? Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, maybe what was your first MySpace? I feel like half the people listening to this are like, what are these
What is that?
people talking about?
What's AOL? What's dial-up?
Did I just sign into the Boomers podcast? No, we're not boomer. I'm not a boomer. I'm a millennial, unfortunately, but it is what it is. Okay, moving on. We have Belle, Tamatoa, Scrooge McDuck, and then ultimately Sapphire Coil. Sapphire Coil is one of the cards that hasn't really taken a placement in the Sapphire Steel deck, but it is a card that was very, very exciting coming into set 7 and specifically in the Ruby Sapphire decks. Now, the other cards we got from set 7 were Unconventional Tool. Really, that was only the only Ruby card that was kind of exciting for this color combination.
Yeah. I think that's it.
John, Andy, Justin, any other Ruby cards that were interesting from set 7?
I mean,
Or specifically Ruby Sapphire?
Not for this deck, no. Nothing stood out.
Yeah, it was definitely kind of lackluster as far as the Ruby cards. And the Ruby cards in the Ruby Sapphire deck are just so strong. You obviously have Sisu's and Maui and B-Preps and kind of the typical package there. But Unconventional Tool has shown some limelight in some of the Ruby Sapphire decks, but not the decks that made top 8. And the reason being is you can do something really interesting with Unconventional Tool, which is a 1-drop inkable item, where when this item is banished, you can pay 2 less for the next item you play this turn. And so when you combine this with Belle, you can banish your Unconventional Tool, and then you can play something like Fishbone Quill on turn 2, just for 1 ink. Or on turn 1, if you play Unconventional Tool, you play Belle, you can play Sapphire Coil even on turn 1 for free. So it's a very interesting combination, but again, not something that has been maybe tier 1 Ruby Sapphire, but I do think that there's something interesting there, and we're going to talk through those deck choices. So, kicking it back to you all and the crew, I'll start with you, Justin. Like, obviously, some of these cards have been impactful in Sapphire Steel, but hasn't really pushed Ruby Sapphire to the forefront until this past weekend. Like, what do you think has changed about the meta that really created an opportunity for Ruby Sapphire to press in?
Well, I mean, if they're running Fishbone Quill, it's probably partly because Blue Steel is pushing Green Steel down, I would assume. And I think there's advocates that Green Steel is better than Blue Steel, but I came up in Lorcana with Blue Steel traditionally being better than Green Steel, and I sense that it's probably making it difficult for Green Steel to come up. And so then you can afford to run things like Fishbone Quill, where you can go low on hand size and not get discarded down. So it's not taking up a spot in your deck where you're not going to use it. So perhaps that's why Fishbone Quill has showed back up. And then I actually didn't even quite realize, and it's crazy, the differences in the nuances of the words on the cards. On the unconventional tool, I thought it read like banish this item, you pay 2 less, but it's when it's banished. So you can banish it with something else and get the effect. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah. Yeah, which I think it actually makes it even better than if it was like a banish ability similar to Popsicle or Fortisphere. The fact that you banish this through some other mechanism, whether it's, Flaversham or Bell or, even Gleam, which, gains you lore, you can actually pay less for another item, which is really interesting for sure.
Gleam.
John, why do you think Ruby Sapphire originally wasn't that exciting in the meta and now for some reason has really pushed through? It never went away. I want to be clear on this podcast. Like, it never went away, but it kind of gotten like shadowed by the other decks. But like, what has changed?
I mean, the second place deck from the opening weekend was Ruby Sapphire items, so it is worth noting. That being said, the weekend prior to this and the week leading up to it, we saw this huge shift into a mid-range version of Blue Steel, a Kiwi Birds, Cogsworth and Friends style list. Both of those style lists were getting really popular, and the Cogsworth and Friends specifically had a winning rate into the top 9 other decks in the format coming into this weekend across the board. The statistics from Inkdex are where you can see that. That leaves that type of deck, a mid-range deck, doing that well, leaves a huge space for a well-tuned red-blue deck to come in and just walk through the field, and that's definitely what we saw this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was because of the evolution of the Blue Steel deck that I think you're right that Ruby Sapphire was able to come back in, because again, it's a well-oiled machine. Yes, it got some new tools, but at the end of the day, the core of the red-blue deck is the core of the red-blue deck, and it's fantastic. And there's actually 2 different versions of the deck that I think are extremely well positioned. But before we move into those deck lists, Andy, anything from your perspective, what has created a opening for Ruby Sapphire to really reclaim its status as one of the best decks in the format?
I think its ability to ramp and play big red cards like Sisu and Be Prepared. The blue steel list or any steel list wants to go wide. And that's why Pete is so good against this deck. But if you go wide and you don't find that Pete, then you get punished really, really, really quickly with Be Prepared, with Sisu. Even with the Coil. Coil can make it very tricky when you're inking with Quill, and double inking, shrinking 2 characters at a time, playing a Sisu, and just wiping the board. So I think Red Blue just found its weekend to attack the wide range of steel and just took advantage of it. When I play Red Blue, I just want to ramp as fast as I can so I can clear the board if I'm playing steel. So like just playing my own game plan and just surviving.
Yeah, the game plan's pretty straightforward. Yeah, ramp with Sapphire, banish with Ruby, and then get over the line at the end of the game, either with Shark or Dime. Shark in Pirate's Life or Dime. And there's just nothing better. Ruby just can get rid of anything on the board. And I think Coil actually, in some ways, helped Ruby Sapphire get around the Pete meta. So obviously Pete has shown its face a lot in set 6, and then now in set 7, it's pretty much in every single deck in the top tier. But the ability to be able to get around and still banish a board without needing to play actions is pretty incredible. Like the ability to be able to ink twice, either with Fishbone Quill or something like Tipo, and then also still play Sisu to be able to banish things, or play Little Sisu, or play Madame Medusa to banish an opposing baby Tamatoa. Like there's so many different ways that this deck can deal with characters on the opposing side's board that it just makes it really hard to play against. And I think that's really difficult. And definitely showed up this weekend. Well, let's get into the list from the weekend. So first and foremost, we are going to share 3 different versions. We're going to share 4 deck lists, but we're going to talk through 3 different versions that have their unique elements to it. And then we're going to wrap up the Ruby Sapphire section with really doing some altering and playline analysis. So here's our first deck. This is actually the 61 cards that ended up winning Charlie's CCS tournament by Hector. Shout out to Hector and Southside Gaming. I believe he's on the Southside Gaming team. Great store, great player. But what stood out on this deck list specifically, and then Justin, I'll kick it to you to comment on what's unique about this and kind of like what are the advantages and disadvantages of this build, is specifically Shark. So obviously this Ruby Sapphire deck is leaning into the Maui Half Shark. It's also leaning into a Pirate's Life. And then also it plays How Far I Go, which is different than some of the other decks. The other decks don't play How Far I'll Go. And so, yeah, what are the advantages you see, Justin, with this build where they're leaning into Shark specifically, a Pirate's Life, and something like How Far I'll Go, really on the action-heavy side into the current meta? Justin?
Well, the Maui can really tax all your Zeuses. So it can be hard to remove it every single time it comes down. And you've got multiple Zeus targets that you are very valid. You don't know if we're talking open deck list, different story, but you don't know if the Tamatoa comes down, the little one, or baby Tamatoa, as we said earlier, if it's going to drop a dime on you, and then next turn they're going to drop a Toa on you, a big Tamatoa on you. So you've got to kind of have to answer that one, and then you also have to answer Maui Shark. So you're kind of having to fight on 2 fronts, and so that's, I think, one of the biggest cruxes of where we're at right now with trying to manage through this is trying to understand which way their opponent built red blue. The other thing that I would say here is that with this build, they don't have to manage that Sapphire Coil and Ink combination, so they don't go too low on hand size as much, because they could still use Be Prepped. Obviously, they still have this as a tool, right? But I think that's part of why Ruby Sapphire is starting to surface, is they're figuring out the play lines that allow them to ink at the right moment while keeping their hand size up to be able to like keep utilizing Sapphire Coil. Whereas I think the play lines were a fair amount different before, and they've had to change the way they think.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. And two, being able to cast How Far I'll Go and get that second ink. Because again, it's something that, like, when you cast How Far I'll Go, you're putting one of the 2 cards in the inkwell, which is going to trigger that coil. And so if you can sing something, like even off a Hiram or a Grandma Tala, sing How Far I'll Go, then be able to either play Sisu, Medusa, or Big Sisu, is just incredible. So the fact you really can take out anything on the board, I think that's what ends up happening. The other great point I think you highlighted, and I just want to like underline this, is that you now in this version of the deck at least have 7 must Zeus, Hades, or Let It Go, or Strength with enough characters on board, which is not as common, like immediately. So you have 7 cards that you play to the board, and if your opponent does not deal with them on their turn, like, it's devastating for them. And I think that's really powerful, where the next version we'll see actually only plays 4 because it doesn't play Shark. And so I think this version specifically really has that multitude of threats that makes it quite difficult even for the steel decks to be able to handle. John, what do you think about this deck into the current meta? And then Andy, if you want to add on to this as well, and before we move on to the next list.
I think this deck is going to be one of the highest skill cap versions of this list into the current meta. You're not running Tamatoa, you're not running Dime. So not having that easy out at the end of the game is going to make this a much more difficult list to run. You're going to have to make far more technically competent plays throughout every phase of the game to be able to do well with this version of the deck. It is a good version of the deck. It is obviously very successful. Hector was playing red-blue the last time we saw him in Miami in the previous set, so clearly he's well-versed in this deck. The number choices are a little weird to me, but outside of that, yeah, I'd say this is definitely a high skill cap version of the deck.
Yeah, and John, that's a great call out, is that you don't have Dime. We didn't say that originally, but this list specifically is not playing Dime and is not playing Big Tamatoa. Which are clearly things that have historically been the way that Ruby Sapphire really pushes over. And honestly, this leans more kind of into the DKP line, but not as much from set 6, where obviously you're leaning into more of the actions character route to win. But as you mentioned, that's like the hard route. You don't have the like
It's super hard.
Dime, I win, type thing going on, which we'll see in the next list. Andy, anything to add around this list or anything that stands out to you about maybe some weaknesses with this version over maybe the next version we'll talk about?
No, I think John covered it. I just like to restate that this is a really hard list to pilot. I think at the beginning when the set that came out, everyone just went towards the Sapphire Steel because 8 drops for the Bell Pop was an easier route than figuring out how to figure Coil out. And I think Coil is very resource dependent. So like I love the How Far I'll Go. I love the Talas. I love the Visions. Like you have to keep up with hand size, otherwise you just lose if you don't see that Hiram. And I think when we were doing some testing at the beginning, a lot of the red blue players I was testing against would just deplete their hand and they're like, I thought Coil was supposed to be good. And I'm like, it's good. You just have to manage the resources correctly. So I'm glad someone figured it out and you can showcase the power of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's definitely a deck that if you make one wrong ink decision or playline decision, it can be extremely punishing and feel like the worst deck. Whereas the other alternative is it feels like, not unbeatable, but like in that S tier 0 type category. Extremely difficult. Hey there, I know I'm interrupting a great conversation, and we'll get right back to that, but I wanted to take a moment to thank one of our partners, Viper Sleeves. Viper Sleeves was created by a player for players. It was someone that's been playing TCGs for over 20 years and said, I've tried the name brands, I've tried everything, they feel like they get degraded over time, and he wanted to create sleeves for players because he believes in the power of gaming and believes that it should come with great accessories. And so he developed Viper Sleeves a few years ago, and I can tell you, before we started partnering with them, I was obsessed with these sleeves. I reached out to Jim and said, hey Jim, I don't know what you're doing with your sleeves. I absolutely love them and would love to partner with you. Would you let us? And he said absolutely, because he believed in Purple Shadow's mission and wanted to be able to be a part of that. So we're grateful that we can offer you an exclusive discount at Quest Like a Pro with the code Quest Like a Pro. So if you go to Purple Shadow Gaming right now, or you click the link down in the description or the podcast show notes, you can go to purpleshadowgaming.com, take a look at the array of colors that we offer, and you can get a 15% discount on your order if you use code Quest Like a Pro. And if you order over $65 of sleeves, we'll even throw in free shipping. Again, we're so grateful for our partner Viper Sleeves, and we hope you'll try them out. They've been said to be some of the best sleeves. Our team loves them, and we hope you and know you will too. Let's get back to it. Well, speaking of different play lines, this next version we're sharing, so this is deck number 2. This version is still your standard list. So you have your T-Pos, your ramp packages with Sail. You also have Flaversham, obviously, Sisus. You have Coils. This one brings back in Quill and Lucky Dime, but also brings back in something that I love, which is Scrooge, because this is more of an item build versus an action build. And then last but not least is it actually has 2 Maleficent Dragons back in the deck. So Maleficent Dragon, 9-drop, inkable, 7/5, quest for 2 on play. It's a Dragonfire, so it gets to banish chosen character. This was a 4 of in all the Ruby Sapphire decks historically, especially the ones that were ramping and playing Dime outside of the DKP version. But now we're seeing it come back. Whereas for a while in set 7, like this card was like back in the, Lilo collector bin, at that point. Like it was back in the box. And now Maleficent Dragon has resurfaced. This deck also plays Big Tamatoa, and again, it plays Lucky Dime. So what about this list stands out, Andy? And how does it compare to the previous one and kind of its position or posture into the current meta from your perspective?
One thing I'd like to point out, because I believe this is the list that played Hector, right, in the finals?
It was. So this is the second place list from the Charlie's CCS tournament.
The biggest tool in the mirror is Be Prepared. And this list does not play Be Prepared. And Hector used that to his advantage, as he should, because you can just go wide. Those sharks, it's super hard to deal with those sharks, Tamatoas, anything big. You have to really like use Sapphire Coil to its fullest extent in order to even clear that board with a Sisu or brawls and stuff. So that's my big, like the first thing I look at this list is I'm like, there's no Be Prepared. And I don't know how you cannot play with that card. It got to second, which it did its job to manage the steel meta, but I think in that mirror you really want to Be Prepared. I think DKP once mentioned, like, in the mirror you always want to play 4 of. If you don't play 4 of, if you play 1 less or 2 less, you lose that mirror. And it showed this weekend.
Yeah, and as someone who's played a lot of Ruby Sapphire the past 3 sets, the mirror match is like one of the hardest matches you'll ever play. And it does come down to like, do you have, in some cases previously, you'd need more dragons and more B preps. It was all about like, how many dragons and B preps can I stack to be able to like one-off trade, play, one-off trade, play. And so I do think that is a glaring difference in this list. But John, what's your take?
So this is one of my favorite lists of the weekend. I'm very close to sleeving this up for a 5K. This list looks like a lot of fun. The reason the show and tell deck that we were talking about earlier did well was because of Maleficent Dragon. The dragon is positioned really well in the current format because of everyone relying on less characters and more supporting pieces. That dragon does a lot of work. The only thing I don't love about the list is the 2 Fishbone Quill and 1 Greatstone Dragon. It just feels like those numbers are off. Like I want a combination of 4. I don't like being at 3. 3 just doesn't feel like you got enough to go on. But you're running Cusco, you're running Madam Mim, a 3/4 split on the Sisu. The deck looks like it's positioned to just do really well. And as we look at this deck and the previous deck, you do have to remember the bubble for the CCS was 701. So you had to go 711. Sorry. You had to basically go almost completely undefeated through Swiss to even hit the bubble.
Yep.
So these decks are very well tuned. Just because one of us is looking at it going, I don't know. We're probably wrong.
It was definitely a grueling tournament. Like the fact that I think it was 2 711s, 9th and 10th, did not make top 8 after 9 rounds. 7-1-1, 9 rounds, didn't make top cut, which is crazy. It was best 2 out of 3 as well, which is like grueling. Like, yeah, definitely well tuned, definitely well played. One mistake is the difference between, top 8 or not, basically, on the entire weekend. So again, congrats to all the players that made top 8, including a Quest Like a Pro alum at this point, Lamb Chops. I do want to shout out Lamb Chops. Congratulations on your top 8 run with Sapphire Steel. An incredible run. But yes, he was then banished in top 8 by Hector's list, the previous list. But still incredible. Justin, anything that stands out in this list that either is a question mark or do you think is actually an interesting inclusion for the current meta?
I would actually respond to Andy a little bit, and I don't know the right way to build it. And I know you mentioned B prepped, like kind of being what you would prefer to see in here, but I think Sailor is off of B prepped in his list, and so not that this makes it right, but he's probably also a quest like a pro, right?
He was, yeah, Quest like a Pro alum as well, Sailor, Ruby Sapphire kind of connoisseur, as they like to say.
The other thing, and Andy and I were talking about it earlier, is the difference between Scrooge and Tala. And it can feel very frustrating when you play Scrooge and like there's a lot of good cards you really want to grab, but you can't because you only get to grab an item. And it can be very frustrating. But the 4/4 body is also very not irrelevant. It's very nice. And so that could be an interesting adaptation to try and get used to the deck.
Yeah, for sure. And I think I've seen how good the 4/4 body is. Like, even if you just play Scrooge 4/4 and it's just a 4/4 body, like, it's not bad. It's really, really well positioned into this. And it's very different than having a 3/3 on board. However, as you mentioned, Justin, like, looking at the top 4 and missing, which you do often, feels really bad when you send like Big Tamatoa dime to the bottom, or something like that. It's almost just part of it. And I think, John, maybe you and I talked about this, where it's like, it almost doesn't matter what you see in the top 4. You almost have to just not ignore it. It's obviously new information for you to take into consideration as you continue to play, but you can't get into the mindset of like, oh, I'm putting so many good cards on the bottom. Cause like you wouldn't play you wouldn't play Visions ever. You wouldn't play Aerial ever. Like you would just start getting into this like, well, I don't want to look at cards and put them on the bottom. And I think the knowledge makes certain players uncomfortable. But it's actually like still an advantage. Like, oh, yes, I put these cards on the bottom. Like, that's a bummer. But now I know that they're on the bottom and I could play differently accordingly. John?
Yeah, no, that's a big one, and especially in a deck like this, it's not just the Scrooge you're looking at; it is the Visions as well. You're putting probably over 20 cards around on the bottom. Considering how many cards you're going to draw, you're going to get back down to that 20. So at some point, you do have to trust that you're going to see these cards again when you're playing a list like this.
Especially those early ones. And if not, again, it's more information that you can then say, okay, well, at least I have a better understanding of what the next 24 cards are that are left in my deck that I am going to be able to play with this game. And sometimes that knowledge is actually super helpful with this deck.
Yeah, we definitely saw some people this weekend using that type of knowledge to play to their outs a little bit more effectively and seemingly have miraculous top decks when, in fact, they just paid attention to what they had put on bottom.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we move on to the next deck, because we definitely want to get into the third version, which hasn't really shown as well of a performance as these two. But before we do that, I want to call out one card in this list that we haven't talked about yet. And that card is Ice Block.
Ice Block.
Ice Block was obviously, it was Sisu on ice for a long time in set 6. I think Ice Block completely again went with Maleficent Dragon to the Ice Box, also known as that Lilo collector box, where you put all your cards that you aren't using anymore. Now they're coming back into the deck out of the Ice Box. And so now this is kind of a Sisu on an Ice Block. There's only one in this deck. What's our take? Like, Andy, what's your thoughts on the one Ice Block? Coil was supposed to replace this card. It's inkable.
I think I would say it's like their fifth budget Coil. So they wanted to see it. It's their budget Coil. So they just wanted to see that item to do more more. I think it's important to look at the Sapphire Steel decks and all of their characters with an Ice Block, or a majority of their characters with an Ice Block, can get brawled. Because I think the highest they have is the Tamatoa, which is 4. So everything else below that, Smee, Bells,
I guess
Lawrence.
Scrooge
I
is
guess
4 as
Lawrence
well.
isn't. Yeah, 4 as
Yeah.
well. But the majority of it could be dealt with just an ice block. So I think it's like leaning, just guaranteeing that item so that they can deal with the board. Or even just help with trades. Scrooge into another Scrooge. Now it lives. Just like protecting their resources, which is their board.
Yeah, I think it's a great call out. Just being able to have that one reduction of strength on the opposing side of the board does make trades really interesting. And again, too, the difference between ice block and coil is ice block just requires it to be exerted.
Mm-hmm.
And so you don't have to be able to expend that extra ink or extra like inking another card. Again, it can help you get down an additional character. So you could like ink, coil, let's say a Tamatoa, but then you're going to ice block a Pete or Bell and then play Sisu and be able to take out the board. And so having that additional effect is really powerful. But John, what do we think about the inclusion of ice block? And are we going to see more ice blocks in the coming weeks?
I like this inclusion. There's a few other lists that did well this last weekend that were running 4 coil and 1 or 2 ice blocks throughout all the major large events that happened between the US and Europe. Leaning really heavily into the Medusa Sisu brawl, it feels like a very strong play right now in a meta that is by and large on the lower end of the strength scales. Take advantage of it and just shore up the fact that you're usually only need one of these.
Yeah, I think it's great. Justin, any call outs for you on the inclusion of ice block? And maybe again, it's just the 5th coil, and you need that in this current deck list.
That would be exactly what I was gonna say. Exactly what Andy was gonna say there. What it did say was that I think it's just they wanted a 5th Sapphire coil.
Yeah. It also increases the item count for Scrooge, which again makes it less sad and kind of offsets that. Because I think this version's playing 5, 8, 12, 14, 17. Yeah. So it's still not up there in kind of the songs range for Ariel, but at 17 is still a great number. And so having that one additional item is extremely helpful. And honestly, with Hiram being able to like have an additional item there too, because a lot of times, again, you need an item to be able to banish. And in this case, you may not want to banish Coil or Quill in this case. That actually brings me to, sorry, I haven't commented on this, but 3 Vitalispheres feels aggressive. Like, I don't think I've seen a Ruby Sapphire deck include that. And I hadn't noticed it before, but having 3 Vitalispheres in this list, and I believe the prior list
They both
played 3 Vitalispheres as well, which again, it's an item that's great, but this deck doesn't even, the first deck didn't even play Scrooge, but
I
still
get it
played
with
3
Shark.
Vitalisphere.
Like with Shark, sure, but this list, I don't understand it. Doesn't mean it's wrong. I just don't understand it.
I think you have to be aggressive. You have to deal with the board. If you don't find your Sisus or your brawls, I like it. I've been always on 3 Vitalis here when I played Red Blue. When I went to Vegas and I took Red Blue, I had 3 Vitalispheres because I mean that meta was definitely different, but I think it's such a good inkable one drop. It's a, like you said, Hiram target. You draw. You want to guarantee those draws. I know DKP is only on 4 popsicles, and that seems crazy in my like just 4 1 drops for Hiram to hit on turn 4. And I think that's crazy, but usually it works for him and he finds those popsicles. But no, I love the inclusion. I think you have to deal with the board. Your Sisus can deal with the board, your T-Bows. It's just something quick. Even like locations too. I think if the top 4 had the red purple with location, fairy island, libraries, and the Forbidden Mountain. After a Be Prepared or after clearing board, if they can drop 3-2 locations, it could be really hard for a list like this to deal with it without Vitalisphere, especially when they're not playing Maui.
Oh my gosh. I didn't even notice that they were not playing Maui.
Maui's so good.
Maui is not in this current
Maui's
list of
not
the
on this
Dime
list.
version. Wow.
We are at a point with Red Blue where there are so many good cards, it is impossible to include them all, unless you're going to do something wild and play 77 cards.
No thanks.
Who
No
knows?
thanks.
Maybe next weekend we will be back with the 77 card meta. Yeah, I didn't realize Maui isn't in here, and just for that sake alone, Vitalosphere is almost like a must include, in my opinion, after as being a Ruby Sapphire player. But I do think, Andy, to your point, that was proven out in the top 4 of the CCS tournament, where I believe it was Hector who played in. No, it was this deck who played into. No, I guess it was Hector that played into the Ruby Amethyst deck. Yeah.
Yes.
And he was able to use Vitalospheres really efficiently, getting them back with Tamatoas to be able to continue to take out those locations. And so you saw it was masterful to just be able to control the board, control the board, control the board.
Mm-hmm.
So again, not all the time just having Sisus and Maleficents and Brawls and Medusa. Like every card in this deck either draws cards, ramps, or banishes characters, which is insane. Yeah, pretty cool.
Yeah, there's so many good cards now. I think John's take right there is important to like elaborate on, because I think when the beginning of the set came out, they want Bell, the new Bell that comes into play with Popsicle or any item, and the unconventional tool that we mentioned in the beginning. I think a lot of
Yeah.
people were just trying to fit everything in, and it's so hard to find the right ratios right away. And I think that's where people made mistakes and didn't their deck building got weaker on certain areas, and that's why the red blue deck wasn't taking off, because they were trying to get really fancy with it when we just needed to add 2 new set cards in this list, and it's going to be good.
Yeah. Or if you go back to the previous version, I believe the only new card is Tamatoa. Is that correct?
Tamato. Oh yeah, Tamato on this one.
Yep. Just have
Yeah,
these-
so only Tamatoa and no Coil. No, Coil's in both
Yeah,
lists.
it's
yeah.
2
So
in this one. The other one is 3 because Scrooge. Yeah.
but I do think it's interesting to call out that these versions that did do well this weekend specifically did not include Bell. And I think the next version we do want to look at, so this is a great segue, is a version that does include Bell and does include unconventional tool, which I feel like is almost like kind of what they wanted you to do. I think it's even in the starter decks. So it's like Ravensburger was like, hey, like here's what you should do. Like even the Big Bell. Andy, I believe you played against the Big Bell deck this weekend as well, where it's like casting items and like throwing stuff and doing all sorts of stuff. But I think it was a distraction to what made the decks better. But for the sake of just making sure we cover our ground on Ruby Sapphire, there is a more item heavy version. And this version here is very interesting. And I feel like it's actually indicative of what you just said, Andy, which is kind of like it's all over the place. So this has Tipo, Sisu, Bell, Flaversham, Maui, Medusa, Shark, Baby Tamatoa, Big Sisu, Big Tamatoa, Hideaway, Sail, Visions, How Far I Go, A Pirate's Life, Be Prepared, Unconventional Tool, Popsicle, Sapphire Coil, and Lucky Dime. And this feels very similar to what the early Ruby Sapphire of set 7s looked like, where you're like, oh, there's so many options. Let's put them all in one deck.
Yep.
But it's just really tough.
I don't know how I feel about this.
This feels
list.
like Golden Corral.
Golden Corral. It's just a buffet.
Yeah. Justin, you're laughing. It's like you've had good memories at Golden Corral.
I'm trying to see the big difference. Okay, Scrooge is not in here. What else is not in here? Vitalosphere. I like this list actually. I'm not a fan of the Bell Pop unconventional tool, like turn 2 drop.
But there's not even Quill in this deck, just to point that out.
Yeah, there isn't Quill.
No Quill, no
There's
workshop.
Coil, but no Quill. Yeah.
So they want to drop a Coil for free?
Yeah, this list is really tough. And the reason I include this list, and we'll share one more list that is more of an unconventional tool version by Frank Karsten, was just kind of pointing out what you said, Andy, which is like, this is the problem right now with Ruby Sapphire is there's so many good cards. Like you can go the Shark route, but then if you go the Shark route plus the Tamatoa route, plus the Big Tamatoa plus Dime, you have like items and actions, and you still need all of the removal spells, and you have Maui's and Medusas, and you have Pirate's Lives and Be Prepareds and Sisus. Like it's kind of all over the place. But one thing I do appreciate is this list by Frank Karsten, who is like a Ruby Sapphire items deck that plays Unconventional Tool, which I think actually does a better job at maybe confining what it's doing. It removes the sharks and the pirates' lives and really leans into the item package. But Justin, I'll let you kind of take a look at this. Like, if you were going to play an items forward deck, like, what's your take on this? Is Unconventional Tool worth it? It plays Quill and Fishbone. It plays the Plank. I don't even know what that card does.
Kills a hero.
But it's Frank Karsten. You got to respect it. He's doing some sort of math to make this work.
Yeah, I suspected that we were going to see a bunch of one-ups. I'm just knowing that it was from Frank. So that's clearly what we have here.
And there's no visions in this deck either. It's not like he has visions, which is like the wild card in Ruby Sapphire. Yeah.
Yeah, he's really
it's all
trusting
over
the
the
numbers,
place.
isn't he? He's not going digging. He's like, it's going to come. I'm gonna get it. I don't know
There's
what to
one
make of it.
Oswald in this deck.
Yeah, one Maui, one
One Medusa, one Maui, one Be Prepared, one Oswald.
Like, can we just
The
see
one
him like
Oswald.
see him pilot it? Because like, good lord.
Yeah. I transparently haven't even shuffled this up and simulated like a deck with like a on ink decks or anything like that. Or not ink decks, ink table. So maybe it works. But this feels way more confined than the previous version, where it's at least like, hey, we're going to go all in on the thing that we do, which is items. And I do feel like a more item heavy version could be interesting for us to continue to explore.
5 ramp on turn 2. I don't like that at all.
5 ramp.
But you have 3 quills and 1 plank.
It's also the highest uninkable
But you also
count
have
of the whole
you have
set too.
Quill too. So you have 5. You have 8 ramp. I think that's his math behind it.
Yeah.
You have 8
Again, we're not
ramps
going to
still.
question Frank Karsten's math. That's not what this podcast is about. That's a different podcast that I am not qualified to host.
The Plank also readies villains, so like
Yeah.
the Queen
can you request?
You can retap.
Yes, you can you can't request.
You can't quest
They can't
again.
quest for the rest of the turn. It's just ready.
But you can ready.
Just ready.
You could do the Queen twice. You
Yeah,
could
but it
do the
costs 2 to do
villain.
that.
You can use Dusa to hit 2 things. Tamatoa is a villain. Is he a villain?
Yeah. All the Tamatoas. Yeah, because the other thing that we saw this weekend in some of the Ruby Sapphire decks, not the ones that made top 8, but there was the Sword of something. Does anyone know what that card is?
Sword of Truth. Banish
Sword
it
of
to
Truth.
destroy a villain.
With a villain. So it's a 4-drop uninkable item that just is like banish this item, banish chosen villain.
Yep, just outright. It's great.
And there was some Ruby Sapphire decks playing that because a lot of the characters that actually quest to win in the Sapphire decks are all villains.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Huh.
This deck is wild.
It's crazy. I don't want to even try to pilot this deck.
You were talking about the first deck being hard. This deck feels crazy, impossible.
This feels impossible to win, but the first deck feels hard, but you can get there.
I feel like this deck is going to be easier to pilot than it looks. I'm not this. Your play lines are going to make a lot of sense when you're sitting across from an opponent. Hey, I don't need this card. I can just Fishbone Quill it. It's not this match, and then you're just done with that card for the rest of the game because you only play one.
But you
So you just, as long as you sculpt your hand to your opponent, you'll be fine.
But you only play 5 threats. I can get rid of 5 threats.
Yeah.
I play
5?
Yeah.
I play 4 Hades. 4 Hades can get rid of 4 out of 5 of those.
Yes, you're not.
I still don't like the deck. I'm just saying.
You're not considering Tamatoa as a threat. Then you're saying the other the Sisu and the big Tamatoa are the threats.
Sisu's not a threat. Sisu is just a 5/4 that quests for 3 once it comes down. Once the effect happens, it doesn't do anything.
Yeah,
Quest for 3, Andy.
And
What cards in your deck quest for 3?
you got to get rid of it.
Wait,
you do
what
have
did
to
you
get
say?
rid of it, but you.
I'm sorry. Is there a card in Blurple that quests for 3?
No, it's gonna
I just
quest.
wanted
If
to-
it quests for
Yeah,
3,
Elspeth.
a Fox kills
That's
it right
not
next
normal.
turn. But you can't end the game with a Sisu.
That's fair.
Tamatoa is a game ender. Both
Time
of
works pretty well.
Tamatoas, yeah, with Dime. If you can get a free Dime, or if you can get a big Dime off of Tamatoa because you just workshopped the way last turn, I can see that happening, maybe. But everyone's prepared for these cards. Like, I mean, like today, Zan versus what's he called? Bivens. He's playing 3 world's greatest, and he saw them and killed 2 or 3 big Tamatoas. It didn't quest.
How does he deal with locations in this deck?
Duck.
One Maui.
I mean, Duck's the big one, but that's
Wait, there's one Vitalosphere too.
Yeah.
Can banish and then
You're just
replay Tamatoa. You're recycling a lot of these items.
you got Bell into the Duck. That's going to deal with most of your locations just fine.
Well, we wanted to share this list because we wanted to highlight that there are kind of 3 versions of Ruby Sapphire, at least on the forefront currently. One was Shark, leaning more into the action side with a little bit of items, still playing Baby Tamatoa. There's also the items version that's more of a lightweight items version that got second at CCS with Dime, still winning with Dime and Tamatoa, but no Sharks. And then there's the full-on Ruby Sapphire items deck, which is kind of similar to what Frank Karsten has here, where you're playing that unconventional tool. You're playing things like Queen and Oswald, or at least playing with those. There's a ton more items in this deck, even including Workshop. So very interesting to see the different dynamics of Ruby Sapphire. I think we've kind of covered the gamut of what's possible, but we do want to do our new segment where we actually do some altering. And so what we're going to do is we're going to take the first deck list that actually won CCS, and we're going to do some altering together. And what we're going to have is each of our crew are going to decide what they would alter, and then the other 2 are going to give feedback against that and talk through the different play lines and considerations. Are you all ready? Okay, let's get into this. So here is our first alter. I'm going to throw this to John. John, you are on the draw, blind, game 1 of round 4, which is all irrelevant information. But you are on the draw, blind. You have no idea what your opponent's playing. How are we handling this hand?
I'm going to keep Sail Grandma Popsicle. Ideally, I want that Grandma to be a Hiram, but if I don't hit the Hiram, Grandma on 4 is still a good option. Popsicle, Sail is kind of just the obvious. Like you're gonna keep those always.
Yeah,
I don't feel like Maui blind is the right call, especially on the draw.
understandably. Justin, what's your take on John's analysis? Any changes you would make, or are there alternatives that you might want him to consider?
0. No, I think it's exactly right. It's like actually on the draw, it might even go against you on that one, that you want it to be Hiram. I think you might actually want Tala to potentially fight the board versus Hiram in the situation, but this is perfect. You got your ramp on 2. It's priority number 1, something to do on 4, priority number 2, and Popsicle. So this is great. This is a great start.
Yeah, Justin, I'm glad you called John out on that a little bit, because I do think on the play you might want to hire him, but I do think on the draw, like Tala is actually better going in blind, because if you're playing against the control decks, really honestly against any deck, Tala actually may, to your point, Justin, be better on 3.
Even a blind squirrel finds a nut every once in a while.
Wisdom.
Any changes you would make?
No, I wouldn't make any changes. I need to find on the draw. I need to find Brawl. I need to find maybe a song for Tala maybe to sing so I can ramp up to if it's like an aggressive deck, if I need to ramp into a Be Prepared. How far it goes in this list, I believe. So you always have lines to consider as well, because like if with this deck, I feel like you just have to play your game sometimes and get to the end game before you lose. Sometimes you want that, the brawl to deal with like an Ursula 3, so it doesn't double sing sudden chill, or like a big threat like that. But if you're constantly just brawling things and you're not playing your game, you're gonna run out of resources, inking cards that you are what might win you the game. So sometimes you just need to do your game plan still as red blue, in my opinion. Just because your cards do better things than theirs.
Yeah, and what's honestly incredible here is if we draw into either 5-drop Maui or even like Brawl, or even like Coil Little Sisu,
Mhm.
like this hand is golden at that point. Like if we have our turn 5, our turn 4 with 5 ink locked in after this altar, or at least in the first few turns, because again, Popsicle's drawing us a card, Sail's drawing us a card, Tal is drawing us a card.
Yeah.
Like you're gonna see a lot of cards in the first 3 or 4 turns to really set yourself up for success. And here we go. This is what red blue does.
This is amazing. It's all inkable too,
Beautiful.
which is helps with your sale, because if you draw like uninkable, it's really you're gonna have to ink that Tala or that Hiram, and then you're in a really bad spot.
Yeah, absolutely. Justin, you're up next.
So don't do a new one. Go hold it. Yep. So what do we? How's the first 3 turns play out on this?
What are we doing here?
What are we inking?
I think we're doing the thing.
What are we inking?
I think we
you're
should refer
playing
that to
Popsicle.
Noah.
Yeah, so we're drawing a card. Let's
But
just
what are
say
you
it's a
inking?
mystery card.
You ink
What are you inking?
Popsicle or you ink Vitalisphere? One of those two.
I think you ink Vitalisphere because you play 3 of them here.
Yeah.
I don't think you
I
ink
mean-
Visions. That card's too good.
You never ink Visions, Tala, or Hiram. I think it's Popsicle or Vitalisphere. Do I want to play Sail and ink into another Popsicle and keep drawing? Looking into my
Yes.
deck? Yeah, I think it's Vitalisphere.
Yeah.
Vitalisphere.
Not
John's
knowing what the 8th card
bickering
is
too.
here, I'm inking Vitalisphere and playing Popsicle 100%.
I mean, you're also going
Interesting.
second, so like, it could change depending on what they play.
Let's say you're playing against Amethyst Steel and they play turn 1 Broom.
Yeah, I don't care about the broom.
I mean, into
Say they
Amethyst
play turn 1
Steel.
Diablo. Like I'm just trying to think of what actual turn 1 play changes that play.
That's
I
true.
mean, into Amethyst Steel, I don't think I want the Visions. I think I want that Vitalisphere so that I can jam a Shark into their Genie.
yeah, but you don't even have the
will-
shark yet.
Yeah, I just
Yeah, but
think
you're going to draw how many cards here, naturally?
so you go
1,
to 8.
2, 3, 4, 5, 6? With what you
8.
have in this hand by itself?
Yeah, but then there's cards later on that deal with everything. Be Prepared, Sisu, Medusa. Like,
This is true.
there's so many.
I don't think there's anything in this hand that doesn't prevent you from going turn 1 Popsicle, turn 2 Sail,
Yeah, no.
Popsicle,
No, not at all.
and
No,
then
we're-
depending on what your
It's just
turn.
the ink route that's different.
It is really you only
Yeah.
can decide on your first turn ink. You can't decide on anything else right now because you're gonna get too
Yeah.
many cards.
I think still Vitalisphere. You just draw into your outs, your Maui into your Medusa.
I also would rather have Visions in the, like, especially knowing that we're playing Shark. If there's any way for me to get Visions in the discard pile over Vitalisphere in this list, I think I would prefer that as well. Like
Yeah.
all the actions you tend to want to like even develop your brain. I know this list doesn't play it, but you always was like, I want to ink this on turn 1, but I also want to have develop your brain like in the discard pile. And like it was always a weird dilemma. So
I feel like I want to go back and watch Hector's games again because I could have swore that he had a similar decision and chose the Visions.
Well, Hector,
during
you
one of his
inked
games.
incorrectly. Just kidding.
no, but I think this is why we do this, right? So like we're looking at a hand where we're saying, hey, do you ink Vitalisphere or Visions? And honestly, some of these ink decisions turn 1 can actually change the dynamic of the game, right? Vitalisphere being in the discard pile could help you later in the game as well, just as my point about putting Visions in the discard pile at some point. So again, lots of interesting decisions here. And again, like maybe there's a case where you actually ink Popsicle for some reason
It
here.
could be
And I'm like,
Popsicle.
I know we
Yeah,
mentioned
it
that
could be an option.
passively, but I would be hard pressed to ink Popsicle here. But again, like maybe there's an opportunity to do that.
Yeah.
If you have opinions, please add it in the comments. But let's jump into the next round. Justin, you are in the hot seat. You ready for this?
Scenario.
Okay, the scenario here is it's round 9. If you win, you're in top 8. It's game 3. You're on the play, and you're playing against Sapphire Steel.
Unlosable.
What style Sapphire Steel?
Sapphire Steel, you're playing against the Moyne list, which is very similar to Zan's new list, which is basically no Oswald, no Queens, very much into like, it just does the Sapphire Steel thing. Like you're just trying to play into dime. It's not the aggro version. You're not playing Cogsworth, but you're just like leaning into the curve and driving forward.
It's an interesting.
Just for everyone listening on audio only, we currently have Sapphire, Coil, Madame Medusa, Tipo, Hiram, Sisu, Little Sisu, Popsicle, and Big Sisu. You're on the play.
I am not seasoned enough for one of these cards, so you've got an obvious 3 cards here. Keeping Popsicle, keeping Hiram, keeping Tipo. That's perfect. I'm not keeping Big Sisu. You can go ahead and ship that one. I'm not gonna keep Medusa. I'm gonna hope that they're gonna react to me, so I'm probably not playing the little Sisu, the cup of soup Sisu. And then
Homeless Sisu.
I just don't know on Sapphire Coil. I would throw that back to everybody else. I would for sure keep the 3 cards. I know that's not wrong. I don't know what else that makes sense to keep here.
Okay, so just for everyone, you're very confident that we should keep Popsicle, Tipo, Hiram, but your question is whether we keep Coil here or not, but you're definitely sending back all of the uninkables, which was Little Sisu, Big Sisu, and Medusa.
Maybe not the little Sisu, but definitely the big one and probably the Medusa.
Okay, so we're definitely, does anyone disagree that we should send back Medusa and Big Sisu? So Andy, I'll let you decide amongst the other 5 cards. You're going first against Sapphire Steel, Game 3, Round 9, winning in on the play.
So I would ship the little Sisu and the Coil. I want, like I said, I'm trying to play my own game. I want to ramp into the shark by turn 4. Turn 4? Is it turn 4? You sing how far I go on turn 3. You ink, yes. Turn 4. Turn 4, I want a shark. I want to play a shark. I want to play a Tomato. I want threats to deal with their board. If I'm playing against Steel, they have to find that Zeus. They have to find strength with 5 characters on board, make it hard for them. If they don't, it's a stalemate, and it gives me more time to continue to do my game and just grab those coils, grab the big Sisu, the little Sisu, the Medusas to just control their game at that point. So I would ship everything except for those 3 cards.
Okay. John?
Okay, so I'm on a completely different play line here because I'm looking at the list that plays Smee, Bell, Pete, Scrooge, right?
That's not the list. That
It's not the
wasn't,
list.
no. So the list we were talking about is just playing Scrooge,
No.
Bell, Hiram, no Smee.
Oh, okay, no Smee.
No
That
Smee,
changes
no
it.
Oswald. But it's a good call out though, because that may change it. So let's assume, John, first and foremost, do you have any feedback if it's not that version? And then if it is that version, how would you change your mulligan or
Okay,
your
so
altar?
if it's not that version, I agree with shipping back the Sisu and the Coil because you're not going to be hard pressed right from the rip. You can go ahead and take your time and ramp up and get to your bigger threats and control the board of the threats like Andy was talking about. Okay, so
Yeah.
I misunderstood.
Let me
the person
comment
we were playing against.
really quickly though too. Knowing that you have Tipo here, you're already on the play, so you're already down a card. You're Tipoing, you're down another card. You're playing in Sapphire Steel. They actually have very little ways to deal with Hiram.
Yep.
So you actually want to play Hiram on 3 on the play, in my opinion.
Yep.
With the hopes that you at least draw 4 cards off this, which actually puts you back in this game. Because if I don't draw, I need to draw 2 cards at the minimum, but if I likely draw 4 cards off Hiram, I'm actually back in this game and like ramped effectively versus doing, Andy, what you suggested is maybe trying to rush into Shark. Is if I play Shark on 4 with this hand, like I'm dead on resources. And if they Zeus, like if they just like untap and Zeus on 4 on their turn, like I don't know. I think it's a really bad day if they do that.
If they Zeus on 4.
If we try to turbo ramp to Shark on 4 and they just untap and Zeus us, we're so depleted on resources. And also too, I don't know what we really have to quest into with Shark against this deck, especially if they're like thoughtful about it and just don't do anything. Versus like hopefully drawing 4 cards on turn 4 off Hiram.
Yeah, I mean, you still always draw those 4 cards.
But if you turbo ramp, you don't, because you're trying to play Shark on 4. So you actually don't play Hiram on 3. You have to ramp again on 3.
You ramp, you ink 1, ink
You have to ramp, Shark.
second, you ramp from your deck. You have to have how
Shark
far
on
I'll go.
5 then, and because the idea
Yeah.
was to how far I'll go off of Hiram. That was what the idea was.
Yeah.
Yep. But Shark on 5 is actually, I think, you're better off trying to Shark on 5 with these 3 cards versus. Yeah.
I think it's
The
these 3.
only question I would be is like, do I keep Coil just in case? So I
Yeah.
definitely draw 4.
So the reason I was thinking about the being different and being a different play line, because I thought he was on this Smee, Bell, Pete line. It's all these 3 drops. You would want to do turn 1 Popsicle, turn 2 Coil, turn 3 Sisu, turn 4 Hiram, and just skip the ramp and use Tipo as ink. But that's only in a very unique scenario against these more character-based, heavy to the ground lists. I think you guys are right with this, with the way it's set up right now.
Yeah, the only other interesting thing would be maybe you keep Sisu. So if you play Hiram on, just so you know you have it, to kill their Hiram. So, because if I draw 2 on 3, they play Hiram back into my Hiram, and I'm able to draw 2 more off Hiram and Sisu their Hiram. Because again, they can't deal with your Hiram very well, but you can. Or do you just trust the heart of the cards because you have 6 more ways to deal with you? You have 4 brawls plus 2 more little Sisus in the deck.
They may not Hiram on 4.
If you Hiram, do you think they Hiram back?
They don't
actually know.
have. They don't. But
don't
they don't
think so.
have
They have
the
Duck.
aggressive early start. So
They don't have
Yeah,
ramp.
the only other option would be
Wait,
them
they do
play
play
Duck.
ramp. They do play ramp.
I think they'd probably try to jam the Duck in, because the Duck is going to be good if you don't have Coil down.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
I just think that deck's really slow. You just
The
get a
Sapphire
lot
Steel
of
deck?
Yeah, you get a lot of bodies, but they're just quests for 1. I'm not scared when I have Ruby cards.
I think we saw that play out this weekend too.
Yeah, like they just died.
Okay, so here's what we drew. We drew a bunch of Inkables. We drew Maui Shark.
There's your double ramp too.
Yeah, you can play into, but in this case, you'd probably play into Tamata. But again, I think on 5, like we talked about, is probably better than 4 in trying to rush it, especially going first.
Here's my question for Noah, our resident red-blue enthusiast. On 2 in this hand, are you playing Tipo or are you playing Sail?
How many Uninkables am I playing?
I think it's like 13. It's
Very
13.
low.
It's that much.
It's pretty low.
It's
Yeah,
13.
2. Yeah. 8, 10.
I have it up. It's 13.
Yeah.
Just.
So it kind of depends on what we're inking on. I'm probably inking Shark on turn 1.
Are you?
Yeah.
Into blue steel.
I don't think you do.
You got 3 Pirates Life.
I think you always start with a Tipo or a Sail. I think Sail because you don't have a 1-drop. You
I
just
guess
ink
that's
Sail.
fair. Yeah,
And then
yeah.
Tipo's
No,
your
that's fair.
flex.
I forgot we had double ramp. Yeah, no,
I
that's right.
ink
The one you're not going to
Sail.
use.
I ink Sail because Tipo gives me that flex spot if I draw an uninkable like Big Sisu or Medusa.
Well, no, now I think in this case I might actually keep Sail.
I will only keep
because I have 7 Inkables in my hands.
I will only keep.
That's what I was thinking.
And I would rather not lose the card advantage.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking at. That's what I was getting at. That's why I was curious.
Ink Tipo, play Popsicle.
The only other downside, though, because also Tipo gives them a storm target or a.
I mean that's
the
fair
Storm Rage
too.
on.
But you're going. Yeah.
Yep.
And you
Storm
don't
doesn't
really
feel
need
good.
it. The only take would be to play it, so then you have Tipo to help sing Pirate's Life later. But again, I just think like Tipo is also just like a free storm target if they just like Bell storm me.
Yep.
They should potentially ink Bell on turn 1, even if they have it. But let's say they don't. Yeah, I don't know.
As the guy that's always sitting across the board playing steel into these Ruby lists, I love it when you play Tipo over Sail because it gives me that storm target. It allows me to get 1 card deeper with an uninkable that was just going to do like 2 random damage to a Hiram and not really be effective. It actually gives me a tempo play in moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's why I inked Shark here, because I don't know what I would want to play on turn 2 without knowing if they play Bell or not.
Those are your threats.
You know what I mean?
Those are your good cards.
It's game 3, right? You know what you're playing into. I think you remove the target. Get rid of the Tipo.
I think no matter what, it's
in the
ramp.
comments, please let us know.
No matter what, it's ramp. No matter what, it's ramp.
Yeah.
We'd sit here for a while and debate this, but I think the consensus so far is maybe ink. Tipo-ish, maybe sail and play popsicle and pass.
I mean, you're gonna have to ink one of these cards regardless.
That's how I feel about it. That's why I'm like, there's part of me that's like sharks getting inked
No, I think it's
in this
Pirate's Life.
scenario.
I
Necessarily.
think it's Pirate's Life.
Yeah, I think Pirate's Life before Shark.
Hurts life in
But
the
you need
discard
bot.
pile.
Yeah, but you don't need Pirate's Life into blue steel items.
You
Or
don't.
blue steel.
You might though, because you don't have die. Like you don't have like again. It goes back to how this deck is like. You need lore. Like you have to win.
Yeah, but you're getting the lore
Yeah.
through like this doesn't have time.
Yeah. Okay. Well, in the comments, if you have an opinion on this, this is interesting. Either way, I think this hand is pretty great.
I like this hand.
I would
I
be
play
looking at
this
this
hand.
hand feeling pretty confident that I know I have Hiram on 3. And I think it's just a solid hand all around. I think I'm playing Sail on 2. But again, it's so dependent, right? Like if you draw, that's why I think I ink Shark here because I want to know, and I ink Tipo next turn.
I don't know.
Ugh.
My instinct says
He wants the
sail.
actual cards in his hand. He wants to figure this out.
Okay, new game. Andy, you're up. Last hand. For those audio only listeners, we have Tipo, Flaversham, Maui, Hero of all, Vitalosphere, Pirate's Life, Hiram, and Maui. This is a weird-ish hand. Same scenario, Andy. Game 3, round 9, on the play.
Same matchup.
Sapphire Steel. Yeah.
I just ship away the Maui and the Pirate's Life and the extra Hiram.
You keep this Maui?
You keep one Maui, yeah. You want to fight the border. You have your 1, 2, 3, and 4. Now we just need inkables. Do I keep Maui for an inkable? Kind of want to.
So currently you're going to keep Tipo, Vitalosphere, Hiram, and then you're debating whether you keep a Maui or not.
Yeah. It's 13 on inkables. I have seen 0, and I'm going to draw 3. What else do I want to ink in this deck? Not a Bra. I mean, maybe a Bra in this matchup. I don't have Coil right away. Maybe a Coil. I think I keep a Maui, actually, for that turn 1 play.
The second Maui.
The second Maui, yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
And then I ship
John,
away.
you already jumped in here. What's your take on Andy's altar?
I like the idea of keeping an additional card as ink for turn 1 because you do not have that popsicle to refill. I just disagree with which card. I would rather ink a Pirate's Life on turn 1 and draw into that Maui later, because Maui is very good into these blue-red lists. So I want the Maui in my deck over the Pirate's Life.
I can see that argument. Oh, Pirate's Life wins you games. Maui doesn't. That's my argument for it.
Maui wins a lot of games into blue steel.
You already have a Maui. It's gonna take care of 2 things. Maybe, yeah, just 2 things if I don't find another popsicle. Or a Coil.
Justin, what's your take here to wrap us up? And I'll give my commentary because I'm currently in a completely different camp than everybody. Maybe I'm just a little bit more riskier with this deck.
Yeah, I think I suspect I know where you're going, but I think I like the Vitalosphere, Hiram, Tipo, just ensuring that you have an item for Hiram. Because if you don't draw on this deck, you're screwed. Excuse my language.
No, it's true though. Especially against Sapphire Steel, like you need the advantage going first. You're already going to be down a card off Tipo. Like, yeah, there's a lot of reasons why that is true.
Now, if we send back, I just got the hypergeometric calculator up. I'm not going to do it in my head and act like I'm smart. I'm just going to do it on the calculator. So if we send back
We'll edit the calculator part out. So you just like all of a sudden just share like magic math.
So if we
Frank
got
Karsten?
If we send 2 back, then we've got about a 43% chance of getting 1 uninkable or more. So if we do 3, 57, 58% chance of drawing 1 or more. And so if you do 2, if you were looking for 2, you only have a 15% chance of drawing 2 or more uninkables. So I think you don't keep the extra ink here. It seems like a pretty low chance. But, I mean, you're just trying to do your thing, so maybe you're fine with keeping the Maui, plus this also fights the board, so I could see keeping one Maui, not two.
15%. I kind of want to just ship the Maui. Just that card's gonna be a Maui if it's an inkable, right?
Because I don't know why we're keeping this Maui, like even at all. And I'm also like against keeping Vitalosphere, but again, it's like winning in. I have to draw 2 cards on turn 3, so maybe I keep the Vitalosphere here
You
just for
have
like
to.
the safety.
You have to.
I think it's like earlier. I'm probably shipping Vitalosphere as well and just keeping Tipo and Hiram.
If you send
Oh.
4 back, you're gonna have a 25% chance of getting 2 uninkables or more.
Yeah. I just don't like. What's the logic here of keeping Maui, Andy?
Fight the board. The board as soon as you can. Protects your Hiram too.
Yep. Hiram gets to quest, and you get to kill anything they have turned sideways. It's a turn 4 beat stick that takes out their biggest guy.
Yeah, I just don't think they're doing anything.
That deck doesn't do anything.
Doesn't do nothing. Okay.
It's not that it doesn't do anything, but I'm just
Nothing at all.
thinking their turn 4. Like, let's say they just mirror me and they play Duck or Hiram, and then I like untap and I have Maui. Like, they haven't done anything.
Probably gonna ink it anyways, but like that's mainly why you're keeping
Yeah.
it. But you have the
I
option to
keep
use it if
it.
you need
It's
to.
the option. I like the option. Yes.
Fair. Okay. Well, let's see what we do.
We
got
those
2 uninkables.
Beautiful.
I want to like do new game and see what the first card is and see if it's uninkable or not.
Wait.
Well, it doesn't really.
I know,
work
not
It
like
yet.
doesn't
that.
work that way. Yeah.
I know.
No, I like this hand. Yep.
That's just it.
Play Tipo. Bury one, ink them out. Yeah, you're in a good spot here.
So nice.
I like
It
this.
looks good.
Yeah.
Okay. And then
It's
if you
not
don't,
great, but it's fine.
what do you
I
think
love it.
you're?
It's decent.
What do you think you're inking with Tipo? I know you're gonna get to draw one card.
I mean,
Medusa.
we get to draw a card.
Maybe Medusa. It also depends on what you draw.
It's probably
I
what
was-
we draw. It's probably what we draw, honestly, in my opinion.
I do want to play Medusa here.
What would you not? What would you not ink if it was off the top?
Or would I not ink
Yeah. So what
Probably
would
a
you?
crab. I probably wouldn't put a crab down. Would be my thing.
this matchup? Yeah, maybe it's the crab. That's like the only one. Everything else can be inked.
Yeah. I think I'm inking Let It Go, Maui, Medusa as my first 3, like with Tipo.
Yeah.
Again, like maybe I draw another uninkable and like maybe it's better to Tipo that, but I think most cards I would draw, I would probably want to keep.
And this is why we're keeping Vitalosphere, so you have your Hiram target.
Yeah. Well, and it got better too because you have How Far I'll Go, and which is not as good as drawing 2 more cards, but is decent as a way to use Hiram on turn 4
Were you
if
gonna?
you don't draw into another item.
No. Were you gonna send Vitalosphere back and look for Popsicle? Is that what you were gonna do?
Yeah, but I would have drawn. I would have taken, like, if I was taking that route, I would probably have shipped Vitalosphere and Maui, so I just keep Tipo and Flowersham.
Yeah. Yeah.
Higher chances. Yeah, I could see that. So
Yeah.
the next 2 cards. Wait, 2? You would have shipped.
If only there's a
it's
way
not
to
gonna work.
draw
It doesn't
on
really
this.
work that
It
way.
doesn't
but,
work that
like,
way.
I would
Yeah.
have missed if we take that into consideration. Yeah, it's interesting. Again, I think this is where like this deck actually, I think, favors those that really do the work on altering and inking and like having these types of discussions. I'm so really grateful that we were able to do this tonight for much longer than we expected, but I think this deck deserves that. And so really appreciate you all coming together for us to discuss Ruby Sapphire, because it's back. It's resurrected some. It never really went anywhere, but it's back now and kind of has been at least proven on the main stage. And so I'm sure if you're going out this weekend and playing in any tournaments, like many of those on this call are, we have a State 48 Cup, 5K, and then a 2K this weekend. So back-to-back tournaments this weekend. I'm sure we'll see plenty of Ruby Sapphire. Those that were on Ruby Sapphire that were like, oh, let me try Sapphire Steel. And they were like, this deck is bad. I want my Ruby cards back. I think this weekend's results at CCS and other tournaments will give them the confidence to push back into Ruby Sapphire and pick that back up. I still think we'll see probably 40-50% of the meta be Sapphire decks. I wouldn't doubt. So we're still in a sea of Sapphire. Yet I do think it's going to be a bit more mixed between Ruby Sapphire, Sapphire Steel, and even Andy's favorite deck, a Blurple. So we'll see. And two, like there's so many different versions of Sapphire Steel now. So I feel like that's like 6 decks making a meta, but they're all very, very different. So we'll have to see how that goes. Any final thoughts? We'll do around the horn as we head into the weekend, and any tips that you would make sure our listeners pay attention to. Andy?
So my question to you is, because you mentioned the State 48 Cup, do you have any bold predictions about Ruby Sapphire being in the top cut of the State 48? Any percentage numbers?
I think there will be one Ruby Sapphire in top 8 on
One.
Saturday.
Okay. What are your guys' thoughts?
I think Amethyst Steel is going to win on Saturday.
Amethyst Steel. Justin's deck. Okay. Anyone else? John, Justin, you guys think Ruby Sapphire will be big this weekend?
I think it's going to be very big this weekend. I think we'll probably see 50% in the top 8. I think we'll see 4 out of 8.
Ruby Sapphire decks, you think? Wow.
I think so.
I can think of one player right now that I can see him being in the top 8.
We do have people coming in from California for this. There's a couple that are reserved from Utah coming in for this. Like, it's not just our locals.
Right. But I'm just saying I have like at least one person in mind. I think there's going to be a good showing. I think we had like 90 people so far registered. It could be more. Last I checked was last week.
It was 95
95.
a couple days ago.
It's awesome.
It's going to be a good weekend. Looking forward to it. 2 days of Lorcana.
Justin, do you have any predictions on
101.
what's going to take down this weekend? Or even just like what you think will be made up, or the top 8 will be made up of?
I think we'll see Amethyst Steel there a little bit. I bet we're going to see some Amber Steel. I don't know about top, but it'll be played a fair amount, I think. I'm not sure that green yellow can crack through,
Tech's so good.
but we'll see 1, 2, anywhere between 1 and 4 Sapphire Steel. And the same for Ruby Sapphire. Anywhere between 1 and 8.
Not 0.
Just a
but 1
bold
to 8.
prediction.
Yeah.
Is it a top 8 cut or top 16?
I think it's top 8.
Okay.
Yeah, it's top 8. I do think if we have another weekend that's completely dominated by Sapphire, like this last weekend and the weekend prior, where it's more than I think Forbidden Mountain did a breakdown. It was like 70% were Sapphire deck. If we have another weekend like that, we need to take a hard look as a community at what Popsicle's doing in this game.
Change a lot.
Don't take Popsicle away.
Blue decks would die. Blue decks would die.
Well, we'll have to see. It's going to be a great weekend. I'm sure we'll be back after the State 48 Cup to share more insights from the weekend overall, both in your all's playing. I won't be playing because I'll be help hosting and supporting State 48 Cup all weekend, which I'm really excited to partner with Ink Thieves and Top Cut Gaming to put on that. Purple Shadow Gaming is really excited to be able to support that. But yeah, we'll be back to talk about that weekend and the many other tournaments happening all around the US and abroad. I believe there's a big tournament in Michigan this weekend as well, hosted by
Class Cards.
World Class Cards.
It's Wisconsin,
that's
I
this
think.
weekend. That's right. Yeah.
Wisconsin, which
I
will be
think
really
so.
interesting. And again, there's tournaments all over the place. And I think we have to look at wide array of meta to be able to kind of imagine what is going to continue to shape up. So grateful everyone's here. Justin, John, Andy, thanks as always for spending time with us, really unpacking Ruby, Sapphire, and the current set 7 meta. So we'll just have to see. Things keep evolving, and that's what makes this game fun. And we hope to see you again soon. Happy questing. Thanks, everyone.